Good afternoon. Today I want to compare two moments of technological transformation in narrative media, the interactive revolution of the 1990s and the rise of AI systems in the mid-2020s, itself perhaps another kind of revolution. On the one hand, many of the conceptual issues we associate with AI today, like nonlinearity, generative variation, database logic, immersion, distributed authorship, and interactive storytelling, were already being explored in foundational ways during those 1990s experiments. On the other hand, many of the underlying logics of these two revolutions are profoundly different. And though it's less the topic of this paper, they also differ sociopolitically, as the internet revolution of the late 80s, 90s was largely bottom-up, driven by universities and startups, whereas the AI transformation is largely top-down, driven by the immense wealth of a few large corporations. The digital systems of the 1990s externalized structure. AI systems internalized structure. The early systems made narrative architecture visible and explorable in a turn toward the spatial. AI systems increasingly conceal narrative operations with latent probabilistic processes while encouraging a generative engagement. Understanding this transition helps us think not only about technology, but about changing conceptions of narrative, agency, authorship, and cultural imagination. Both systems both reveal and conceal aspects of power, authority, and memory. They open up ways of telling stories, encouraging working in one direction more than another. Each of them open up narrative possibilities, open up the narrative imagination in certain regards, while limiting production in other regards. So how to look at this? For example, the period between 1987 and the early 2000s was incredibly fertile for experimental media. In a very short span of time, we saw the emergence of interactivity through programs like HyperCard and Storyspace, a move toward non-linear editing systems like Avid, Media 100, and Premiere, the introduction of the internet and HTML markup language, a hypertext markup language, again encouraging both interactivity and multimodality, a mixing of media, with the invention of Photoshop, with layering and compositing. Early streaming media video was very limited in what it could do, but there were some wonderful programs with it, such as QuickTime VR, that contained within it possibilities for links and portals. Innovative programs like Macromedia Director, which envisioned the screen as a stage, and interactive video software like DVD Studio Pro. These tools transformed how artists and scholars imagined storytelling. You could now make stories that spread in different ways through interactive maps and topographies, through different linear sequences that could be combined and moved among. Narrative no longer had to unfold in a single linear sequences. Stories became navigable, layered, multilinear, recombinatory, spatial, and immersive, and could include all sorts of cultural materials. The concept of remix became important. Importantly, these technologies emerged within unusually open interdisciplinary environments. Artists, filmmakers, programmers, theorists, designers, scholars collaborated intensely in those years. And this is exemplified by festivals and conferences that came to being, such as DAC, the Digital Arts Conference, and SIGGRAPH, Ars Electronica, and ICEA, which became laboratories for hybrid experimentation. There was a widespread sense that an entirely new cultural form or forms might emerge. Paradoxically, Many innovations emerged precisely because of technical limitations, creation through constraint. And in fact, there was a lot of writing at the time about constraint-based creation that preceded it, such as the Oulipo poetry movement. Bandwidth was slow and storage was small. Streaming video barely functioned. This was interesting in working with videos because then you had to work with very little video elements, small pieces on the screen, small segments that would need some other apparatus to hold them together. The constraints encouraged fragmentation, modularity, collage, image slicing, layered composition, and a multimodal design to give weight to text, static image, sound, and video elements, for example. These limitations became aesthetic engines. One defining feature of the systems of the 1990s was structural visibility. HyperCard and Storyspace, for example, made narrative architecture visible through nodes, links, maps, branching pathways, layered structures. Narrative became a navigable terrain. One envisioned the paths and possibilities from each clip toward perhaps multiple others, as if taking paths through a map, making choices. Readers did not simply move from beginning to end, they explored. There are plenty of examples in interactive writing along this regard, such as Michael Joyce's Afternoon, a Story, or Shelley Jackson's Patchwork Girl, and in media production, such as my own works in the Concealed Narratives, Harvest, and Cultures and Web's multimedia works. And these all transform narrative into spatial systems in which meaning emerged through a process of movement among fragments. At several times, I've pointed out that this, in a way, illuminated a process that has always been somewhat present in film, the experience of the film editor who once sat in front of dangling clips of film footage, piecing them together in different ways to make a final work, although the viewers would only see one expression of this, whereas now one could explore the editor's process in envisioning multiple outcomes, multiple routes through the material, through the data set. Nonlinear systems expressed this. They transformed cinemas. Editors could maintain multiple timelines simultaneously, rearrange sequences endlessly, preserve alternatives, compare divergent structures side by side. And these moved into interactive environments, including the interactive DVD Studio Pro, where these multiple versions could be presented and could coexist. Narrative, therefore, becomes a field of possibilities rather than a finalized sequence. Photoshop and HTML further destabilized traditional ideas of the page and the frame. The page became an interface. Images became layered, sliced, modular, interactive spaces. We no longer have the slice tool in Photoshop, but it was a tool especially designed to create, to slice up an image so some parts could become interactive and malleable when placed in an internet table. Video fragments were embedded within broader multimedia environments, and the cinematic frame no longer functioned as a singular bounded image, but part of some larger multimodal system. The 1990s also introduced important experiments in spatial storytelling. QuickTime VR offered navigable panoramic environments connected through hotspots. The history matters because it reminds us that technological affordances are never neutral. Different infrastructures encourage working in different ways. The systems of the 1990s foregrounded a kind of structural awareness, an exploratory navigation, a multimodal density, a visible construction. Later, platforms prioritized a kind of seamlessness and invisibility instead. So now we get to AI, because AI systems reopen many of these earlier questions, but under very new conditions. Like the interactive systems of the 1990s, AI challenges assumptions about authorship, narrative stability, linearity, recombination and participation, dialogue, engagement with the machines. The logic, though, is quite different. The 1990s externalized architecture. AI systems conceal the architecture within latent spaces, within neural weights, within statistical inference, within a process of digging into things we can't see and having to, as much as we can, try and contain, control, or orient the actions. HyperCard showed you the map, and AI hides the map. Earlier systems relied on a kind of finite multilinearity. We made a map, we had all these different interconnected elements, but for the most part, it was a contained universe. Creators explicitly designed pathways and gave explicit choices to users among those possibilities. AI systems operate through continual variability. Their paths are not fixed. Outputs are generated dynamically through probabilistic prediction. And images are, in a sense, generated, as it were, out of nothing, out of elements mushed combined together. Rather than navigating a designed labyrinth, users negotiate a shifting set of possibilities or potentials. Narrative becomes less a structure to explore and more a field of probabilistic emergence. This fundamentally changes our narrative imagination because it changes our interaction in the creative process. The systems of the 1990s emphasize the kind of navigation with choice. How do we offer choices? How do we create topographies that create enriched choices that allow us to see different perspectives or possibilities? AI systems emphasize prompting, generation, impermanence, but also a process of discovery and engagement of trial and error to pull out, as it were, from the larger data sets, something that has resonance or echo. The user modulates generation, and interaction becomes a kind of conversational steering. Another major shift concerns fragmentation. Multimedia aesthetics of the 1990s foregrounded a montage, a mixing, a colliding, a clashing, a disruption of the traditional frame. Meaning emerged through juxtaposition among discrete fragments they put on a web page next to each other. Hypertext, database, cinema, multimedia interfaces all emphasized this process of assembly and brought the process to the forefront as one of a kind of collage and montage. AI systems instead foreground synthesis. Fragments dissolve into statistical representations capable of generating new outputs. We take an image and say, transform this part, which comes blended into it. We expand, we combine, we generate new material. And all of that draws from the data sets and pulls things together, dissolving fissures rather than exaggerating them. Similarly, early systems manipulated, even though they do have, in a different sense, a kind of Dadaistic collage quality, but we can get to that separately. Similarly, earlier systems manipulated recorded time, nonlinear editing, rearranged footage, and later programs like Max MSP and Jitter allowed us even to stretch or transform time qualities and create a kind of a montage of time experiences. AI systems have a different kind of relationship to time, where we actually explore unrecorded time. We predict motion, we extend scenes, we fabricate plausible continuity, we generate events that never occurred. This changes our relationship between media and reality. We have a different creative imagination about what reality contains or has as a possibility for cinematic creation. For example, I work a lot now with photos as a basis for generating video rather than shooting video. One of the most provocative differences concerns perhaps what we might call the digital unconscious, because these structures shape the way we imagine the world. The 1990s systems tried to externalize their structures. You could inspect pathways and maps and layers, and you could in a way, internalize and imagine how worlds could unfold, how stories could unfold along these paths. AI systems perhaps produce a more opaque unconscious. Associations emerge from statistical relationships, but it also suggests a kind of collective digital unconscious in which the collective materials of the sets are a part of, in a way, a broader cultural language. We see bits of the world we know being reformed into new things in front of us. This opacity has cultural and political implications, perhaps also. Earlier interactive systems encouraged a kind of critical awareness of the mediation, and AI systems risk naturalizing these outputs. And I think that's part of the task of working with AI is to find ways to expose the system, because it too easily fuses everything into a packaged bundle. How do we expose the biases and assumptions embedded within the probability systems to reveal and actually perhaps gain power with the system we're using? I want to, though, conclude by emphasizing continuity as much as rupture. Many conceptual concerns central to AI today were already in experimental media in the 1990s, like distributed agency, recombinatory narrative, spatial storytelling, multimedia environments, immersion, participation, and questions of empowerment. What changes with AI, among other things, is a migration from a visible architecture to a latent probabilistic system. Visible structure becomes hidden inference. Finite multilinearity becomes continuous variability. Montage becomes synthesis. Navigation becomes prompting. Assembly becomes generation. And we, the makers, are now caught in a very active process of creating material out of instability and finding ways to define this new condition, a new condition of time, space, and perhaps memory. Revisiting the 1990s reminds us that alternate trajectories also existed. There's software that was wonderful in that period that then became outmoded, and some of those offer great possibilities to return to. Those earlier systems foregrounded a kind of structural awareness, exploratory participation, and critical legibility that can be brought back into the media today. The challenge for future narrative practice may be therefore to combine the strengths of both paradigms, to recover the navigability, transparency, and spatial imagination of earlier interactive media, while harnessing the discursive and collective power and flexibility of AI, to find ways to transform AI such that it also functions as a mirror to the forces and possibilities that are concealed within its structures. Thank you.